Hello, and welcome back to the COVID Long Haulers podcast. We share real stories from those living with long COVID, what they've faced, how they're coping and surviving. My name is Rush, and I will be co hosting this episode today with Emerson.
Hello. The year 2025 is slowly coming to an end, and this will, in fact, be our last episode of the year. So, we felt that we should close this year out by sharing our own health updates and those of Matt, who was our first guest of the podcast this year. We wanted to bring him back to hear how 2025 has treated him and how his general long COVID has evolved in the last months.
Yeah, for those of you who haven't listened to episode 6, titled New Daily Persistent Hell, Matt has been living with long COVID since 2021. His main symptom is a persistent headache, with a burning pressure feeling in his head, as well as severe gastrointestinal issues which seem to flare his headaches. He also struggles with cognitive issues, tinnitus, and has experienced stroke-like episodes, which were likely TIAs, so transient ischemic attacks. We highly recommend listening to his episodes, and today we're bringing Matt back to discuss any new developments, both positive and negative, and to reflect on the ongoing realities of living with long COVID. So, hello, Matt, and welcome back to the show.
It's good to be back.
We're so excited to have you back, Matt. How are you doing today?
But not too terrible, which is about as good as I can hope for.
Oh, damn. I'm so sorry. So, since February this year, how have your symptoms evolved overall?
I mean, still about the same, just still taking it one day at a time.
Matt, am I right in thinking that you have, since your last episode, you've been reinfected with COVID?
Yeah, I believe it was over the summer I had got COVID again. It definitely wasn't as severe as my first infection back in late 2021, but it was still a very severe illness. I was definitely extremely worried that it was going to impact my health problems, but as far as I can tell, it didn't. It did flare up my headache during the infection. Obviously, most infections, they'll give you a headache. Now I suffer from a constant everyday headache. So when I get any illness, not just COVID, but any illness, it will make my headache get real bad. So obviously avoiding any illness is the name of the game. But unfortunately in our societies, that's not always possible to just avoid illness indefinitely. So unfortunately, I was infected again. Luckily, I recovered okay. It doesn't seem to have affected my health. It doesn't seem to have worsened any of my conditions. I guess my only worry now is, are these repeated infections resetting my recovery?
Yeah. It's really scary because we know that repeat infections cause cumulative damage in our body, and there's all this research coming out. And we're the people experiencing it firsthand, and we don't know what the long-term effects are. Even if immediately afterwards our long COVID isn't worse, what does it mean for our health in 5 years, 10 years, 15 years? But I'm glad to hear that at least you haven't gotten immediately sicker after your COVID infection.
Yeah, I think I've only had COVID once, and my biggest fear is again and again, and going
Yeah.
through the hell I went through, and then it being worse afterwards than it is now. It's definitely good to hear that it hasn't made things worse, at least. But yeah, definitely the sort of timeline reset on recovery would be a big concern too.
And just to put it into perspective on what us long haulers are dealing with, as far as my most recent infection over the summer, I got it from going to the grocery store. Now, I don't go hardly anywhere. And whenever I do go places, I wear an N95 mask. I'm sanitizing my hands. And I also go to the grocery store very late at night. In my state, or at least in my area, grocery stores tend to be open till 1 or 2 a.m. So I'll go to this grocery store at like midnight just because there's a lot less people. Obviously, I have to go to the grocery store occasionally. I have to go to doctor's appointments. I have to engage with society in some way. And unfortunately, that's how I got COVID, was going to the grocery store. My wife still does work, but she's very careful not to get sick at work. Luckily, her work is still very conscious of COVID, which is very surprising here in the US. I guess it really just goes to show that for many of us, there's no way to completely avoid infection, even with my precautions, I still will catch COVID here and there. Luckily,
Yeah.
before my infection over the summer, I hadn't been sick for 2 years, but unfortunately, it finally got me.
I wanted to ask you, Matt, did you take any kind of medications that could help lower your viral load during your acute infection? So something like metformin or Paxlovid, anything like that?
Yes, I was prescribed Paxlovid, and I had initially gone to the emergency room very late at night during my infection because I started having a lot of like chest pain and breathing problems. And obviously, in the middle of the night, the emergency room is the only thing open. So I wanted to get checked out, especially considering my ongoing health problems. So I went ahead and went to the ER and was treated like a crazy person. They looked at me like, "Why are you here?" I asked them, "I have tested positive for COVID. Can I get a prescription for Paxlovid?" And the doctor at the ER told me, "No, that's only for old people." Which was very strange to me. I was like, I hadn't heard it was only for old people, but okay. So
That does not sound correct.
yeah, I
No.
don't think that was correct at all. But I mean, I wasn't getting anywhere with this doctor. The phrasing that he was using, the general tone was very dismissive and very like, why did you come to the ER with a cold? It was very
Gosh.
eye rolly and scoff. It was just really, really awful situation, especially like while I'm having these severe chest pains and breathing issues. So I went home and I was able to call my doctor's office, and they ended up getting me into a virtual appointment, and she prescribed Paxlovid right away, no problem. She said she knew about my health problems, which of course I tried to explain to the ER doctor, which did not help at all. I began taking Paxlovid right away, and I think within probably a day and a half to 2 days, my infection was so much better. I felt like it was a mild cold as far as the symptoms go once I started taking Paxlovid.
I'm glad to hear that it was able to help you manage your acute symptoms, and probably also maybe contributed to not having worse long COVID symptoms after the infection as well, since your viral load was lowered.
Yeah, exactly. That was my main thing was making sure that I didn't worsen my existing condition.
So, Matt, you recently shared with me that you had received a diagnosis of gastroparesis. Can you tell us a little bit more about how that came about and what has happened since? Any treatment plans, medications, anything like that?
Yeah, so I was diagnosed with gastroparesis. This was maybe a couple of months ago, I believe. Now, obviously, I've had these ongoing gastrointestinal problems since the very beginning, since my first COVID infection. And it was this long process. I mean, I'm sure all of you here know we're seeing doctors, but a lot of the time we're waiting sometimes months, so this is not a quick process. So they did order a gastric emptying study, which was a type of scan where they have you eat radioactive eggs. It has like a small amount of...
Disgusting.
Yeah, it is really
Sorry.
gross.
Sorry, let's take a step back.
Matt and I have both done it.
radioactive eggs.
Yeah.
What does that mean?
So it's just eggs that have a small amount of radiation in it that allows their scanner to track the eggs as it moves through your digestive system.
Is this similar to like a barium swallow?
I've done that as well, and it is similar, but the thing with the barium, because usually the barium is like a heavy liquid, they're coating your internal digestive organs so that they can kind of get a map of the whole inside of it. Whereas with the eggs, they're really trying to track how the food is digested itself.
When you first mentioned it, I was thinking like a century egg, but no, I realized that's silly. It's obviously going to be like scrambled eggs or something like that.
Yeah,
it's scrambled.
Yeah, it's scrambled eggs. And for me, that day when I did the gastric emptying study, my head was flaring up real bad. But obviously, these appointments are very important. I'm waiting months for these appointments. So even though that morning my head was flaring up real bad, I ended up making it down there and, getting through that 4-hour scan. But it was hell. It was literal hell The
Yeah.
procedure is hard enough as it is, but with a severe headache the whole time, it was real bad.
Yeah, that test made me crash terribly. I don't even know how I survived that scan. It was just hell on earth. And then when the results came in, they were never discussed with me by any kind of, GI specialist. And my GP didn't understand the report.
That's kind of what happened to me, actually, is I did the
No.
gastric emptying study, and it showed that after 4 hours, I still had 70% of my food still left in my stomach. And the normal range for 4 hours is between 0 and 10% of your food still in there. So I ended up following up with the initial doctor that ordered the test. And she said, "Oh, yeah, that's abnormal. Not sure why that is." And then she referred me to an actual like MD, because I think I was seeing a PA at the time, which is a physician's assistant. They take doctor's appointments as well, at least here in the US. I don't know how it is outside. But I ended up seeing the MD, but I had to wait for, it was like 3 or 4 months before I got to see that doctor. So saw the MD during the appointment. She just kind of casually threw out this like gastroparesis diagnosis as if I already knew, which I didn't. But she told me, yeah, so with gastroparesis, blah, 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 blah. And I'm like, hang on, go back. What is this term you're using? And she's like, oh, gastroparesis, that's your condition. And I'm like, okay, this is news to me. So that was kind of a trip there. To be fair, I don't think that was the doctor's fault at all whatsoever. But yeah, after I told her, she was like, wait, you you have that, right? And I'm like, no, this is the first time I'm hearing of this. And she was like, oh, okay. So then she like, explained it. But yeah.
I got gastroparesis as part of my long COVID in the first couple of months, and it sucks. I found that I was able to eat blueberry muffins for some reason. So I was able to eat one blueberry muffin a day.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah, for about 6 weeks. After about 6 weeks, it started to get better and was able to eat more things, but I was very limited to about 250 to 300 calories a day. And the biggest concern for me was all that food sitting in your stomach, not going anywhere, causes major acid reflux issues, or it did for me anyway.
Yeah, for me as well.
It used to burn the bottom of my throat to the point where it felt like I was choking all the time.
I have the same issue too, especially with acid reflux. And I also have a hiatal hernia that they discovered, which means that the bottom of my esophagus, where my esophagus attaches to my stomach, the valve there has gotten very loose. So it makes the acid reflux much, much worse. I have acid reflux basically constantly.
Oh no. But was your doctor then able to give you any kind of treatment plan, a specific kind of diet, medications, anything like that?
Yeah, so they explained to me that with gastroparesis, at least according to them, that I should eat smaller but more frequent meals. So they told me I should eat 5 small meals a day, and I can eat small snacks like in between that. And then they also told me to limit my diet, avoid things that are hard to digest, avoid fatty foods, oily foods, fried food, fast food, basically just anything generally bad for you. Which my diet over the last 4 years, through my symptom flare-ups and trial and error, I've figured out what I can and can't eat for the most part. So I didn't really have to make a lot of changes. I have been eating smaller meals more frequently now. And then they also prescribed to me Zenpep to help aid with digestion. It's a digestive enzyme. I believe they usually prescribe it for pancreatic issues. I don't really think it's helping much, maybe a little bit, because I know when I was eating, I would get extremely bad bloating a lot of the time, a lot of like abdominal pain after eating. And maybe that has reduced a little bit with being on Zenpep. My acid reflux has reduced a little bit, not very much, but it's definitely not a cure. The Zenpep, I take that 9 times a day. They told me to take that before you eat anything, essentially. Anytime I have a meal, anytime I have a snack, take it right before I eat. And they said I can take it maximum 9 times a day. And so I pretty much max that out almost every day.
Matt, what hopes or plans do you have for 2026 as we move into that year?
Well, unfortunately, I'm having some health insurance issues here in the US. You have to have health insurance to see doctors and whatnot. So I've been on the same insurance the last like 2 years, but with all the healthcare chaos going on, I'm being forced to change my insurance and go to a completely different hospital network. So my 2026 is pretty much going to be transitioning to new doctors, new health network, probably a lot of duplication of efforts, things that I've already done, having to catch up a different healthcare team on what's been going on. So that's very unfortunate, but it is what it is. I just have to hope that the new healthcare system that I'll be with takes me seriously, listens to me. But I'm just hoping in 2026 they find something, you know. I'm just really hoping that they can order some tests and find something that leads to some sort of road, you know. I mean, I'm 4 years into this and I still have no answers, which I'm sure most of the listeners are going to relate to, even if they're not 4 years into it. But having such severe symptoms and being told everything looks fine, over time is just so grating on you. It's so demoralizing. You think to yourself, how can I feel this horrible? And whenever I test for anything, it's always fine. Everything's always fine. I guess for me, it really goes to show how little we know about medical science in general. And simply testing normal for quote unquote everything doesn't mean that there's nothing wrong with you. It just means that they're not doing the right test or they haven't figured out whatever this condition is. I think maybe just some more positive stuff, maybe personal kind of things. I did recently trade my 4-string bass for a 5-string bass. Playing bass guitar is one of the things that helps me kind of cope with this condition. When my headache will allow, obviously I can't always do that, but I'm pretty excited about getting to try a new instrument. I've been playing that for the last few weeks. That really helps me a lot. I like to, play games on my phone here and there when my headache will allow.
Matt, thank you so much for joining us today and sharing your experiences with us. Rush, one of the biggest developments for you was sudden hearing loss. Do you want to tell us a little more about how that began and what that experience was like?
It's been a fun ride this year, culminating in some guy putting a drill through my skull. So that's the fun part of the journey that we're leading up to here. I had long COVID for about a year, and I would say the worst of it for me was the first 6 months of that. I'm lucky in that my journey through long COVID is relatively, it varies per person. Some people love it for 2 years, 4 years, 5 years, what have you. Some people still haven't recovered from it. But for me, the worst part was the first 6 months. And it was only towards the year mark, I would say, that I started to feel like I'd more or less recovered. But 9 months into that recovery journey, I started having these insane episodes of tinnitus. And at first I thought it was so loud that it was coming from somewhere in the house. So I genuinely, the first time it happened, spent about 20 minutes trying to identify the source of this sort of weird, sort of noise to give you an idea of what it's like, a really sort of tinny screeching noise. I only started to suspect that it was in my head when I went outside, and yep, still the same noise everywhere I went. It was just following me. So those tinnitus episodes, they were long and annoying to begin with, but then I started losing my hearing as well, all in my left ear. This was all going on in my left ear. And one day in September last year, I just woke up deaf in that ear. Well, deaf except for the tinnitus. That annoying noise did not go anywhere. And I would say I was already in a pretty depressed state from all the long COVID shenanigans that I've been through, and I talk about all that stuff more in my episode if anybody's interested in listening to it. I think it's the second episode we did on this podcast. And it seemed like now I had this permanent ringing in my ear, plus hearing loss on top of everything I'd just been through. And tinnitus is one of those conditions that can be permanent as well. I remember being pretty upset about the idea that I'd never know what it was like to feel peace and quiet again. It sounds oddly pathetic to actually verbalize it, but at the time that hurt, because it's a tangible quality of your life that's not coming back,
Yeah.
Now, I will preface this by saying I've had ear issues all my life, ever since I was a kid. Tons of earaches growing up, loads of problems with blocked ears and what have you, and infections. And it settled down a lot in my 30s, and then it went nuclear after I got COVID. I don't know if COVID had anything to do with it. I will stress that there is no established link at all between long COVID and what happened to me. There are anecdotal stories that I've seen of people that talk about similar things, but I'm just telling you the sequence of events here. I'm not claiming that long COVID gave me hearing loss, but it has happened to me. I went on Reddit to try and figure out what was going on with my hearing, and there people told me that the PPIs that I was taking to control the acid reflux and the gastroparesis that I had from long COVID, they were telling me that PPIs were ototoxic, which is to say it's toxic to the ear specifically. So they were saying the drugs I were taking to control my acid reflux were killing my hearing. But when I talked to the doctors and used that word ototoxic, they looked at me with a sort of deer in headlights look that gave me the vibe that I was coming across as some sort of conspiracy nutcase. So I learned not to use that word very quickly. And there's no known link between PPIs and hearing loss either. That's all I know on the official science, but plenty of people are saying online that there is a link, right?
Yeah.
So in retrospect, I think it's probably coincidental that my hearing loss started a few weeks after I started taking PPIs, but at the time, the link felt very suspicious. I got a bunch of hearing tests, I got CT scans. The hearing tests showed without a shadow of a doubt that I had something like a 90% loss of hearing in my left ear. It was actually kind of nice to have a test for once that showed something conclusively wrong with me after being through with long COVID. Matt mentioned it earlier. Yeah, we're so used to hearing that, oh, you're normal, everything's fine. But there's no way someone can tell you that you've gone deaf in one ear, but it's all in your head. You know, they could measure that. CT scans didn't turn up anything, no physical issue. So they weren't sure what the cause was, but they could detect that it had happened. One option, which I wasn't sure I wanted to go ahead with at the time, was for this invasive surgery. I mentioned the drill earlier. They drill through the mastoid bone in my skull, just behind my left ear, which is a very thick part of the bone. And they were planning on performing a procedure called an ossiculoplasty, which is they go in, they take a look, and they repair or reconstruct the 3 tiny little ear bones in your middle ear, called ossicles, which are responsible for transmitting sound vibrations. Mine weren't working, according to the test, so they figured that my best bet was going in and doing that. And what really put me off, though, was that there was a moderate risk of there being no improvement in my hearing at all, even after that sort of majorly invasive operation. But there were also low risks, but risks nonetheless for worse hearing, although I didn't have much more to lose. Loss of taste, which that's pretty major, and worst case scenario, which kept me up at night thinking about, was facial paralysis on the entire left side of my face if they damaged the facial nerve that runs pretty close to that area in your head. But to cut to the chase, I did end up going for the surgery. I didn't, like I say, have much more hearing to lose, so I just gambled on the facial paralysis stuff, and they said they'd knock me out for about 2 hours, and then it's about 2 weeks of recovery, more or less. So I went to hospital, they anaesthetised me at, I remember, around 2 p.m, and I woke up again at 7 p.m. And my first thought was, well, that wasn't 2 hours. That can't be good news. And it wasn't good news. Eventually, when a consultant came to speak to me, I was right. I hadn't just had the ossiculoplasty that they'd planned, I'd had what's called a mastoidectomy, which I had actually agreed to before going under, being told it was unlikely I'd need it. But they need your permission, because once they go in and they see the problems, if there's something they need to fix, they want the permission to do that. So me saying yes to a mastoidectomy, even though I didn't expect to have one, was just par for the course.
Tell us what a mastoidectomy is real quick.
I kind of need to explain what I actually had, which is something called a cholesteatoma. It was one of the potential complications that didn't show up on the scans, but somehow my head was riddled with it. And cholesteatoma, it sounds like a horrible, scary cancer tumor.
Yeah, it sounds
thing,
like cancer or something.
I mean, it desperately wants to be a horrible, scary cancer tumor thing, the way it behaves and grows, but it's still not a cancer. It's more like your body sheds skin, right? So this happens in your inner ear too. So it's like a conveyor belt constantly moving outwards, pushing that dead skin out under your eardrum and out of your head. But in my case, that process broke down and the skin started to get stuck. Instead of being pushed out of my head, it was just building up back there instead. And left untreated, that collection of dead skin wreck your hearing, and it did to me. It gets infected, it can eat through bone, and it can cause brain damage as well in advanced cases, and I had an advanced case. So
Oh
this
my God.
mastoidectomy is where they go in and they cut all of that out. They clear it out. And it's a lot more complicated a procedure. But
Yeah.
I was lucky because there's one stage further. I think it's called a radical mastoidectomy, where they have to break down even further into your head, and the resulting lifestyle changes that you have as a result of that mean that you can never really let your ear get wet again. You're constantly prone to infection and things like that. So you can't deal with rain. You've got to be wearing a shower cap in the shower all the rest of your life, that sort of thing. But it didn't go
Wow.
that far for me. I was quite lucky.
Thank goodness.
Yeah, that sounds horrible.
Yeah. I will say that some people report skin changes after getting long COVID, and my skin is definitely different. It's like drier and flakier, and I have
Yeah.
to use like anti-dandruff shampoo that I didn't used to have to use. And I don't know if that contributed to this situation. I suspect, like a lot of people, I had this cholesteatoma growing in my head before I got COVID, and long COVID's effects on my overall physiology just sped up its development. That'd be my best guess,
Yeah.
but I don't know.
Probably, chronic inflammation from COVID and all that kind of stuff probably didn't have a positive impact on that issue that you had.
So, in addition to eating away the bones in my ear, it also wrapped itself around my facial nerve that I mentioned earlier. So, before the operation, my odds of getting facial paralysis, I thought, which was like the absolute worst case scenario, I think were rated at about 1 in 10,000. It's very easy to gamble on those kind of numbers, but they
Yeah.
weren't they weren't actually my true odds because I didn't have the full data of my condition, because the scans essentially told the doctors nothing. But knowing now the situation I was actually in, we can update those odds to about 1 in 5. So a 1 in 5 chance of getting facial paralysis from that operation.
Oh
Um,
gosh.
Funnily enough, the months leading up to my surgery, which took almost about a year to organise, by the way, even on private healthcare, my left cheek under my eye had been twitching a bunch whenever I lay down to sleep, and it was really irritating. But I just put it down to like stress or whatever, and it would always stop after like 10 minutes or so. And it turns out that was gravity shifting the cholesteatoma in my head and pressing it against that facial nerve. And
Oh my
here's the
God.
thing, if I hadn't had the operation at all, it would have soon eaten through that nerve anyway and given me facial paralysis anyway. But if I not had the operation, 100% chance of getting facial paralysis.
Oh
So
my
I feel
God.
like I got incredibly lucky with my situation. The guy operating on me was very, very good. He's well known in our area. My hearing
Yeah.
isn't worse, and I don't have that weird twitching anymore.
That's
And like I
great.
say,
Yeah.
yeah, and they took that cartilage, they tried to bridge that gap. And there are some days where my hearing isn't terrible, actually better than it was pre-op. And then there are still days when I'm like 90% deaf again. There's no pattern to it. And it doesn't really seem to be improving, certainly not on like a consistent line. It just feels kind of random. I've got a hearing test in a week to try and figure out how much of my hearing has been restored, and I'm quite hopeful that it will say some. I don't feel like I've got 90% loss anymore, at least some of the time. But yeah, that was my story.
That sounds really really terrifying as well too with
Yeah.
I mean I already have a lot of anxiety toward surgery of any kind, but man, drilling into your head, I guess with my constant headache, that's one of my biggest fears is they're going to tell me one day, "Hey, we need to do brain surgery or something like that, something horrible." I mean, I know you didn't
Yeah.
exactly get brain surgery, but still like drilling into your head, that would just absolutely terrify me.
Yeah, it's psychologically distressing to say the least to think about these things, but after a certain point where you've already made the decision, it becomes easier because you're just kind of like on rails. You know you're going to do this thing, and it's got to be done was kind of the mentality I had. I was in the viewpoint that if I don't do this, things are probably going to get worse.
Okay.
So I went down that road, thinking my odds were much better than they actually were, of course. I had no idea what
Yeah.
the true situation was, but because I thought it was an unlikely scenario that things would get worse, and it was a moderate scenario that things would either stay the same or improve, I went ahead with it. And it's very dangerous cutting through your head because there's all sorts of nerves and clusters, and it's an incredibly complicated area to have to do
Yeah.
surgery on. And that's before like, I didn't get brain surgery, obviously, but, that'd be a completely different kettle of fish. But even just the ear, like that facial nerve that controls so many bits of your face, and losing control of the entire left side of your face as a risk was, like I say, I lost some night's sleep over it.
Yeah. So, how did the recovery then go after the surgery?
So the recovery was fine. It was a little bit more complicated than they had told me it was going to be. Possibly they didn't expect it was going to be as complicated. Like, I went in at one point a couple of weeks after the operation to have all this packing because they pack your ear full of medical gauze. And it's basically a tampon for your ear, is what they put in there. So it feels like someone's got their finger in your ear the entire time that
Gosh.
you're recovering. It's incredibly annoying, and you can't
Yeah.
hear anything, so you don't know like if the operation was like success or anything like that. You've just got to wait and see. So after 2 weeks, I was very much looking forward to getting that out of my ear, and they took it out of my ear, and I noticed zero improvement in my hearing. And then they said we're going to have to put another one in for another month, and I was like, what? Not enough. It's such a long time to have this in my ear. Or maybe it was 2 weeks, so maybe misremembering that. But basically they extended the deadline of how long I
Yeah.
had to have this in my ear. And I also had to do that thing, I'm still doing it now, where I'm not allowed to get the ear wet. Even though I didn't have this radical mastectomy, my ear has not touched water for 3 months while this is all recovering. And I
Wow.
get to clean it properly in about a week, which I'm looking forward to. But yeah, it's not allowed to touch water. But at the end of all that, they took the ear tampon out of my head. My hearing the second time had definitely improved. And I remember I got in the car feeling very excited to play some music on my drive back to my house just so that I could hear what it sounded like.
Yeah.
And that was a happy experience because I could actually hear better than I had in more than a year. And it did, like I say, fluctuate. It has gone up and down. I have been, deaf in that year again since having that operation. But I don't know yet where it's going to settle. But I'm cautiously optimistic that it's not going to be worse than it was before the operation. So
Has your tinnitus improved since the operation?
I would say my tinnitus is not worse.
Okay.
It had kind of tapered off quite a lot. It was quite extreme at the beginning, really loud, really distracting. I don't know whether my brain started to tune it out or if it actually genuinely did start getting quieter, or both. It could be both. But it is now at the point where it's like a background, it's constantly there, but it's a
Mhm.
background thing that I'm mostly not aware of until you ask a question like that. And then I go, oh, yes, I can still hear it. Or if it's like really quiet, I'll notice it. But otherwise, it's not distracting me at all hours of the day. I'm no longer that bothered about never experiencing total peace and quiet again. I've gotten over that. It's not worse, but it's probably just something I have to deal with.
That's my
Right.
my biggest issue with tinnitus as well, is just when it's quiet, throughout the day it's not really much of an issue. I don't really pay attention to it, like you said. It's just when I lay down at night, when it's very quiet, that's when it starts to bother me.
I remember reading about tinnitus when I first started getting this sort of really loud version of it. And there are people that suffer it way worse than I've got it, who feel like there's a banshee screaming in their ear all day. Like, I do not have it anywhere near as bad as that. It's a low level ringing noise. Like, if you've ever seen a movie where, like, the main character gets flashbanged or something like that,
Yeah.
it's that ringing noise is kind of what it's like for me. A very sort of mild low level. Although at the start of the onset, a lot louder to begin with, and now it's not.
Okay. So, Rush, before we move on, what is something that you are looking forward to or hopeful for in 2026?
Well, I'm sad as it sounds, looking forward to this hearing test because it's been a long time coming, and I just want somebody to say, yeah, we definitely improved things here. They won't do a hearing test for like 3 months after this operation because things are in flux for so long. that they can't get a reliable reading until after things have had a little while to settle down. So it'll be 3 months since the operation next week, and I'll get that hearing test, and hopefully things will be on an upward trajectory.
Fingers
And
crossed.
yeah, I mean, I still struggle to understand conversation in the office when there's even a small amount of background noise. So I may end up going down the hearing aid route anyway, but
Yeah.
if I don't have to, then great. So I'm looking forward to seeing how that goes. I think it's going to get better rather than worse.
You'll have to keep us updated for sure. But yeah, I really hope that your hearing improves.
Thank you. How have things been on your end, Emerson? Back when we did your episode, Emerson is Lost in 2024, that was our third episode, if anybody wants to go back and look. You were still very early on in your long COVID journey, and you generally seem to have some quite hard symptoms to shake. Would that be fair?
Yeah, I definitely think that I have the more chronic or syndromic type of long COVID. I have about 200 symptoms that I deal with regularly, but those that disable me the most, I would say, are my POTS, fatigue, brain fog, and PEM. And those symptoms also aggravate each other. So when my POTS is worse, my brain fog is worse. When I'm in a PEM crash, everything else is terrible. But on a more positive note, my POTS is managed pretty well. I take a lot of meds to manage it. So midodrine, fludrocortisone, compression garments, regular IV saline treatments, as well as some other lifestyle changes that have helped me keep my POTS in check. My POTS has not improved by its own. I wish it did, but it hasn't. The fatigue and brain fog and PEM are a bit of a different story for me. Generally, just aren't a lot of treatments available for them. And what I have tried so far wasn't particularly effective. But this year in November, I was finally officially diagnosed with ME/CFS, so myalgic encephalomyelitis chronic fatigue syndrome, which could potentially open some new doors for me treatment-wise and hopefully mean that I'll be taken more seriously by medical professionals. It is kind of weird to consider it a positive thing to be diagnosed with an incurable chronic condition, but as Matt mentioned before, we are so desperate to have a diagnosis to know what is wrong with us that it was really validating to have that diagnosed by a medical professional, especially because I was certain that I'd had ME for the last 2 years. So the fatigue and brain fog are the biggest issue for me right now. I spend the large majority of every day in bed, lying down and resting. I couldn't live on my own and take care of myself. I struggle with basic things like bodily hygiene. I can't cook my own food I can't take care of myself.
God, that sounds so horrible. I'm sorry you're dealing with that. I cannot imagine how difficult that has to be. I guess it really just puts into perspective how wide range of issues these long COVID issues are. And it's always just so heartbreaking, like hearing what others are going through.
How long have you had long COVID now?
Okay, so that is a bit tough to answer because I've had COVID so many times now, 6 infections that I know of. But the infection that disabled me and got me to where I am now was in August 2023, where I tested positive 2 days before my 20th birthday. That is when I became homebound and just unable to care for myself, go to university, or have any semblance of a normal life. That infection in 2023 was my 4th COVID infection. So I had had COVID 3 times before that, once pre-lockdown in February 2020, and then twice in 2022. The infection in 2020 didn't really cause any long-term issues that I can tell, but the 2 infections in 2022 definitely set off this chain reaction of long COVID, of worsening health, and more long-term issues. And then in August 2023, I got COVID again. It was a mild infection, and then my life changed permanently for the worse. So that's always when I say that my long COVID started, because that is when I became disabled by it and could no longer live my life the way I used to.
About 2.5 years.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think that's a great thing to highlight too, because there's so many people out there who, in their minds, they think, well, I've had COVID before. I've had COVID once, twice, 3 times, and I was always fine. But simply being fine before from a COVID infection doesn't mean you'll be fine every single time.
Do you feel like you're constantly going downhill, or are you plateauing, or are there times where you feel like you're making progress? What would you say the sort of recovery, if that's even the right word, timeline looks like for you?
So that's hard to answer because some things are improving and some things are getting worse, and then some things are staying the same. I have so many symptoms that it's hard to say, oh, it's definitely going uphill. My POTS has kind of remained the same. The only improvement, quote unquote, I've seen in that regard has been through symptom management. If I were to stop taking my POTS medication and all those things, my POTS would be back to as bad as it was 2.5 years ago. And my fatigue and my brain fog, I think, has improved a little bit. Part of it is through very strict pacing, that I'm just really careful to avoid PEM as much as possible, because I think at the beginning of my long COVID journey, I was constantly causing PEM. And for anyone who doesn't know, PEM is post-exertional malaise, and it's a delayed reaction or crash that can be set off by any kind of minor exertion. And it's not just fatigue, it's a multi-systemic reaction. Your entire body reacts to that exertion. So it can cause fevers, flu-like symptoms, joint pain, headaches, dizziness. And I was constantly overexerting and causing PEM by the most minor things, like, eating meals that were too big or looking at my phone. And that definitely made me worse for a longer period of time until I learned to pace. And then I set a baseline. And through strict pacing, I have been able to expand my baseline and my PEM threshold a little bit. But I think a lot also comes down to other medications I've tried that have helped with fatigue and brain fog a little bit as well. Like recently, I started taking cromolyn sodium, which is a mast cell stabilizer, and that has helped me improve my brain fog and my fatigue a little bit. But I'm far from all cured or recovered or anything like that. I think the main part, what I would call it, is symptom management and coping skills. My body is not recovering the way that yours was, Rush, in the sense that after a while, your body had recovered and it had come back to some kind of level of functioning. What I have is more like I take a lot of drugs and then my body functions. If I take away the drugs, my body does not function.
So you mentioned that you are essentially on a cocktail of drugs, Emerson, and that I think you said you tried new medications this year. So do you want to tell us what ones you tried and did they help at all?
Most things I tried this year weren't particularly helpful. Obviously, there are some meds that have been really helpful for me, namely fludrocortisone and midodrine for managing my POTS. But I've been taking those for a long time. These are not new medications. But I'll just go through the most important things I tried this year chronologically and just talk about what my experience was. So in February, I started taking LDN, low-dose naltrexone, and regular dosed naltrexone is used to support individuals in addiction recovery. At a much lower dose, so low dose, it can be used off-label for conditions like ME/CFS, long COVID, mast cell activation syndrome, also known as MCAS, fibromyalgia, chronic pain, etc. So at doses from 0.1 milligrams to 7 milligrams, LDN helps to fight pain and reduce inflammation. It works by binding to opioid receptors for just a couple of hours, which stimulates the body to create more receptors and increase endorphin levels. Endorphins have pain-relieving and mood-boosting effects. And in addition, it is also an anti-inflammatory medication. It reduces the production of cytokines, including those that cause neuroinflammation. Neuroinflammation is associated with brain fog and long COVID. So I started taking LDN in February and slowly titrated up to the dose that I'm at now, which is 5 milligrams, but effectively do not feel any different at all. A lot of people talk about how difficult it is to go up with a dose because of how severe the side effects can be, and I didn't notice anything. No side effects, no benefits, nothing. LDN did absolutely nothing for me, which was pretty frustrating because I had had such high hopes and so many people talk about LDN being a game changer for them.
I had the same experience with the low-dose naltrexone. It didn't do anything at all for me. I might as well have been taking placebo.
Yeah, it was kind of heartbreaking when the LDN didn't work for me. I had all these plans of things I would do when I felt better, and when none of that became possible, it was really heartbreaking and frustrating. Then this summer, my GI issues suddenly worsened. I developed GERD and was barely able to eat at all anymore. So that's when I decided that it was time to find out if I might have MCAS, which is common in long COVID. I had previously looked into it a couple times, but the dietary changes and everything I tried never really got me anywhere. So together with my GP, I tried a few different antihistamines, but I had absolutely terrible reactions to all of them. They made me sleep for like 48 hours straight, and I just felt like I was a corpse when I was taking them. I've had reactions like these to other medications. This is not new. And at the same time, I was also trying to find the right PPI for myself to help manage the acid reflux that I had developed. But I wasn't able to find an antihistamine or a PPI that I really tolerated. So my GP ended up prescribing digestive enzymes that I think are actually the same as yours, Matt. And that helped me manage some issues quite a bit, but it wasn't a cure-all by any means. So in September, I decided that it was finally time to just try cromolyn sodium, as I mentioned, which is a mast cell stabilizer that is commonly used for mast cell diseases like mastocytosis or MCAS. It's not marketed here in Switzerland for stupid reasons, but it is available over the counter in Germany, so I thought I would just import it. And cromolyn has been close to a game changer for me. Within 2 weeks of taking it, I felt a noticeable difference. My energy levels, brain fog, sleep quality, GI issues improved overnight. I can now eat a larger variety of foods, and I no longer have such severe acid reflux, where I did some research and found out that mast cells are actually linked to stomach acid production. And also, my acne cleared up overnight too. I used to have this terrible cystic acne. My entire face was inflamed and puffy, and now it's all gone, all cleared up. And I also realized that for the last 2 years, I had a constant pressure in my head. It wasn't as terrible and symptomatic as Matt's was, otherwise I would have noticed it whilst it was there. But then when I started taking the cromolyn, it was gone. So that was definitely really interesting.
And this is all really good information, for me as well, because I've been considering that my conditions, or at least some of my symptoms, might be MCAS, mast cell related. That's definitely a medication that I've been wanting to talk to my doctors about as well.
I can really only speak about my experience, but my experience has been very, very positive. I know that long COVID is incredibly diverse, so cromolyn won't help everyone. But for me, it definitely has been very close to game changer. And I wish I would have tried it sooner because it has really improved my quality of life and my baseline. I did not expect it to help, especially because I don't have any of the quote unquote typical MCAS symptoms like allergic reactions, hives, anaphylaxis, anything like that. But that being said, it's definitely not a cure. And that's just something that I want to clarify here on this podcast because I see this misconception out there everywhere from unaffected people. Improvement doesn't equal recovery. You can have a massive improvement in your quality of life and in your symptom management, but still be severely disabled, still be unable to go out and have a social life, go to work, participate in society, all that kind of stuff. And that's something that really bothers me is whenever I talk to extended family members or even doctors, when I tell them, oh, this medication has really helped, they think, oh, cool, okay, you can go back to work, you can do all these things again. But it just means that this medication has gotten me out of bed for more hours every day. It means that I am able to cook for myself and brush my teeth more regularly. It does not mean that I can go back to my old life.
Yeah, I guess that it's probably worth saying is that even when you do see improvement in the chronic illness space, it doesn't automatically mean you're on
Yeah.
the road to recovery. You can't have those days where you are able to accomplish things, and those are amazing, but then, other days you're right back at square one wondering what you did wrong.
Yeah.
And
Often the days where you are able to do more, the next couple of days you will suffer the consequences. And I think that's something that people don't understand is that having fun means being in a flare for 3 days afterwards. Overexerting means PEM that can last for months or even permanently lower your baseline. And that is something that just people, I don't know if they don't want to understand it or simply can't understand because they've never experienced this, but it is incredibly frustrating to constantly encounter that kind of mindset.
And I think often they don't see those results, because when you show up for the event, the gathering, whatever it is, we are obviously masking, we're obviously hiding what we're actually dealing with so that we can have some semblance of a normal life as much as we can. And we have these crashes, we have these issues during and often after for long periods of time. But what the other people in our lives see is, oh, my loved one showed up and they were smiling, they were happy, they were laughing, and then they went home and everything seemed fine, but what they're not seeing is the toll that these things take.
So, Emerson, we were having a conversation just before the podcast started about carpal tunnel syndrome, of all things, because that's something you've started to experience. I think you said since the summer this year.
So I was diagnosed with it this summer, but I've had symptoms of it for, well, pretty much since, I guess, winter 2023. So within the first 6 months of long COVID is when some symptoms started popping up. And then this year I went to a neurologist to get screened for small fiber neuropathy, but the neurologist didn't actually do the tests to screen me for small fiber neuropathy. So he didn't really diagnose me with anything proper. But he did do a nerve conduction test on my hands after me mentioning having issues, and he diagnosed me with carpal tunnel syndrome. I'm not quite sure if it's the correct diagnosis because he didn't take me seriously and he was pretty dismissive towards long COVID and all the issues I experience. Carpal tunnel syndrome can be aggravated and exacerbated by chronic inflammation and autoimmunity, which are both known components of long COVID. So potentially long COVID contributed to it, and it is carpal tunnel. Potentially it's some form of neuropathy.
Yeah, I was going to say, because it sounds a lot like just the usual neuropathy.
Yeah.
I mean, you could say I had carpal tunnel syndrome when I had long COVID because I was getting like difficulty gripping things, like muscle twitching, like the color of my hands was going strange because of blood pooling. And all of that's cardiovascular damage and microvascular damage, I guess you'd call it. I also got it in my feet as well. If you're getting like carpal tunnel syndrome and you have long COVID and you tell the person who's examining you that you have long COVID, they should be able to connect the dots.
Especially because I have neuropathic POTS, so it is known that I do have a neuropathy in my blood vessels. I have muscle twitching a lot. I have nerve pain in my legs and like pins and needles if I sit in a position for too long, weakness in my toes. So there are a lot of things that point to it being a more systemic, bigger issue than just quote unquote carpal tunnel syndrome. But it has been getting progressively worse, especially in my left wrist, to the point that when it flares, I'm not able to grip or hold things, which...
Are you left-handed?
I'm right-handed.
Okay, well that makes even less sense.
Yeah, exactly. And which is really frustrating for me because I use a walker to get around. I need to support myself to be able to walk for longer periods of time, and longer periods of time being like 10 minutes. And on those days, I'm not able to hold my walker or grip it. Basically, I'm losing mobility because of my carpal tunnel syndrome, which is incredibly frustrating when, finally I'm on a medication that improves my ability to be mobile. And then there's this other symptom that no one is taking seriously that is decreasing my mobility in a very strange way.
Yeah, like that sounds frustrating to the max. Yeah. Emerson, what are you looking forward to in 2026? What's giving you hope at the moment?
I don't really know. I mean, I don't have anything planned for next year. I am currently in the middle of applying for disability, and I am hoping that that will be a positive result for me and that I will be able to get disability benefits since I am unable to work, and it doesn't seem that I will be able to work anytime soon. But also knowing how terrible the system in this country is, my expectations are low, and I'm bracing for the worst possible outcome.
Bracing for the worst possible outcome. We'll get that put on a t-shirt for you.
Yeah. But I guess you could say one thing that I am looking forward to is trying ketotifen. I think that's how you pronounce it, which is a different type of mast cell stabilizer. I just got a prescription for it the other day, and I'm looking forward to finding out if that can further improve my baseline. In my personal life, I guess to add something more positive, not medical related, I am hoping to learn some more knitting techniques, as that's what I do most of the time to keep busy. And I'm hoping to maybe start sewing again with a adaptive sewing machine. I think that pretty much rounds up today's episode. And thank you so much to all of our listeners who joined us this year, who listened to our podcasts and supported us. And of course, thank you to all of our guests who were willing to use their valuable time and energy to share their stories with us. We are incredibly grateful to everyone who has responded to any of our surveys for our past episodes, like the Long COVID Awareness Day one, and have followed us on Instagram or Blue Sky. And of course, everyone who has applied to be a guest on our podcast in the future.
We couldn't do any of this without any of you. And as we are closing out the year here, we hope these conversations that we've been having have offered support, connection, and a reminder that none of us are navigating long COVID alone. We'll be taking a short break here on the COVID Long Haulers podcast to prepare for the year ahead. And we are looking forward to returning in 2026 with new guests and some new research discussions that will continue to shed light on this condition and the people affected by it.
I just wanted to say, as someone who has been a guest on these podcasts, I just wanted to thank you guys, Emerson, Rush, Jesse, anyone else who is working on this podcast behind the scenes. I know that there's a lot of work that goes into this, and you guys are also suffering just as much as us while you're trying to put together this podcast. And I just wanted to thank you guys for helping us feel less alone and helping to bring awareness.
Thank you so much. It means a lot. We will be back in January with a brand new episode. But until then, we wish you all a very happy and restful holiday season, and of course, a very happy new year. This is also your reminder to listen to last year's holiday special if you haven't yet. This is episode 5 of the COVID Long Haulers podcast, and it is called Long COVID and the Holidays, Staying Safe and Finding Joy.
As a reminder, while our discussions offer medical-related insights, this is not medical advice. Always consult your healthcare team with any of your medical concerns. If you'd like to connect with our community, you'll find a link to our Discord in the show notes, along with our Substack and our socials. We aim to release these episodes monthly, so please subscribe and stay tuned for future episodes. Until next time, this is the COVID Long Haulers podcast signing off. See you next year.
See ya!